would like now to welcome everyone to meeting 103 of the House of Committees Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities, pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee. On Monday, November 2023, the committee meets to discuss its study on accessing transportation for persons with disabilities. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person in the room and by Zoom.
System, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. We therefore ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when the microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of our interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses. Appearing before us today for the first hour is from the Canadian Transportation Agency, France Peugeot, Chair and Chief Executive Officer, as well as Tom Oomen, Director General, Analysis and Outreach Branch. Welcome. Department of Employment and Office of the Chief Accessibility Officer. And from the Office of the Auditor General, we have Karen Hogan, Auditor General of Canada, Milan Duvniak, Principal, and Suzy Fortier, Director. Welcome to all of you joining us here and virtually. We'll begin with opening remarks, and for that, I will turn it over to Madame Peugeot. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, and hello, members of the committee, as well as the Chair. Thank you for inviting me to discuss access transportation for persons with disabilities. The Canadian Transportation Agency has three main responsibilities. We help ensure that the national transportation system runs efficiently and smoothly in the interests of all Canadians. We provide consumer protection for air passengers, and we protect the fundamental rights of persons with disabilities to an accessible transportation network. The agency is an independent regulator and tribunal. Specifically, we are the economic regulator of the Canadian transportation system, and as a regulator, we make and implement regulations. We also monitor compliance with and enforce legislation and regulations. We are also an administrative tribunal. In that capacity, we resolve disputes between regulated industry stakeholders, users of the transportation system, and communities, either informally or formally, through adjudication and other dispute resolution methods. Accessibility has always been and continues to be a priority for the CTA. Our approach to accessibility has always been holistic and includes a variety of tools, from discussion to guidance to decisions to regulations to enforcement. This in recognition of the fact that social change is necessary and a change in corporate culture. It has to be dealt with on multiple fronts. Our most important regulation on accessibility, the Accessible Transportation for Persons with Disabilities Regulations, or ATPDR, developed out of previous CTA decisions, regulations, and codes of practice, and came into force in phases between 2020 and 2022. The ATPDR apply to large transportation service providers. They are large transportation service providers, I say, and that includes large airlines, airports, and entities like CBSA, CATSA, and covers a vast majority of passenger transporters in a federally regulated system.
Among other things, that federal transportation service providers provide assistance to persons with disabilities in boarding, locating their seat, and transferring between a mobility aid and a seat. Accept and safely transport mobility aids, provide temporary replacements and repairs, if required, due to delays or damage, and ensure that employees who may be required to provide physical assistance receive training to carry out those functions, such as transferring a passenger between a wheelchair and a seat, handling mobility aids, and using special equipment such as a lift. The regulation also include a number of provisions that are considered world-leading. For example, allergy buffer zones and the one-person, one-fare requirement for domestic travel. Indeed, while there's certainly room for improvement, as we have witnessed recently, the Canadian regulatory framework for accessible transportation represents a very strong foundation for accessibility. The agency, like other regulators, use different tools to achieve compliance, including through the issuance of fines or administrative monetary penalties. The agency, as an administrative tribunal, also hears complaints from passengers that believe that the transportation service provider hasn't respected its accessibility-related obligations. In many cases, the agency is able to help resolve those complaints through informal mediation process, while other complaints are adjudicated by the government in council appointed members of the agency who are like administrative judges. As the Auditor General noted in her audit of the accessibility of transportation system, we have made a lot of progress, but there is still work to be done. We are, of course, implementing the recommendations of the Auditor General for accessibility of the transportation system. So transportation, particularly air transportation, is international by nature. So even as we strive to make Canada more accessible, we've looked beyond our borders to try to shape the accessibility of the international air transportation system. For example, since 2019, in collaboration with the National Research Council and Transport Canada, we've led a number of international initiatives to conduct research and develop consensus on how the transportation of mobility aids could be improved. And so it was very gratifying to see that much of this work, led by Canada, was incorporated into the policy guidance of the International Air Transportation Association to its member airlines on the transportation on mobility aids, which was published recently in 2023. In all of our work, we strive to engage representatives of persons with disabilities and the industry to advance accessibility of the system. The Canadian Transportation Agency's Accessibility Advisory Committee includes representatives of both persons with disabilities and industry and provides a very useful vehicle to receive advice and to share information. Let me end by sharing with you that we have just obtained the Rick Hansen Foundation's Gold Certification for Accessibility for a brand new building. So we're very proud of that, and this is another testimony of our commitment to accessibility. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to answer your questions.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Peugeot. Prochainement, nous avons...
Thank you, Madame Peugeot. You have the floor next, Madame Cadieux. 5 minutes.
Hello, bonjour, ça me fait bien plaisir.
Good morning. I'm very happy to be here.
This will be in English today. Thank you for inviting me here. I'd like to start by saying that accessible air travel is an issue that can't wait. Action is needed now. It's already overdue, and I know that this committee knows that as you're taking a closer look at what is needed. When airlines treat people with disabilities as problems instead of as people, that has a profound effect, and it causes harm, not just financially, but also in loss of time, physical and emotional. All too often, when something goes wrong, like a mobility aid is lost or damaged, there is very little empathy from staff, no understanding that it isn't a piece of lost luggage. Many mobility aids are custom fit, and replacements are not optional. It is tantamount to arriving at your destination without your legs. That person has lost a part of their body, their independence, their safety, and well-being. So it is not an inconvenience. It's a catastrophic failure. And I shouldn't have to explain this, yet I do, time and time again, as do others with disabilities. When these failures happen, the person who's been harmed is left to cope with the situation without adequate assistance from the airline. They're left to fight for a resolution that comes as too little, too late. It is ableism. It's pervasive. It runs through our culture. It's reflected in the way people with disabilities are other all of the time, not just in air travel. People with disabilities, though, are people first. And by that I mean we are customers, we are passengers, and we deserve equitable service. A friend of mine has a good line that he uses. He says, "I'm disabled, my money isn't." And that is to say, why is it expected and provided for that you have access to a washroom on a plane, but I do not? Changing the culture so that this is deeply understood at all levels of air travel organizations is critical. because until that understanding is fostered, cultivated, and embedded in operations, change isn't going to happen regardless of the regulations. In my role as Chief Accessibility Officer, I'm an independent advisor to the Minister responsible for the Accessible Canada Act. I also monitor, champion, and challenge the progress being made under the Act. I am not responsible for standards or regulations, compliance, or enforcement. I issued my first report as CAO 2 weeks ago, and in it I make a number of recommendations: mandatory training on accessibility, for more regulation to ensure that organizations understand what they absolutely must provide. I talk about the need for more and better data, and as I follow the work of organizations under the Act, I'll be looking for concrete progress on barrier removal year over year. I'm not suggesting that it's easy. Accessibility is complex. No two people are the same, and what's perfect for me as a wheelchair user is not going to work for someone who's blind or someone who's deaf. Accessibility requires a lot of thought. Planning for the longer term means looking to include things in infrastructure, in the construction of planes, for an accessible future fleet. And for that, the signal from governments, ours and others, needs to come that this will be a requirement, and that needs to be happening today. Lots of good efforts are underway, and I do want to acknowledge the work, but more is needed and faster. As CAO, I'm looking at what's happening in the industry, in other jurisdictions, in the short and long term. What are the complexities to the issues, and to finding consistent, permanent solutions. Ultimately, the issues of accessibility go far beyond mobility aids, and there needs to be a focus on the whole travel journey, inclusive of services and service providers, for travelers with the full range of disabilities and service requirements. But time, of course, is limited today, so I am just scratching the surface for you. But if I can summarize very quickly the key things that I think are priorities for action, it is data at a much more granular level and publicly available, air passenger protections specific to accessibility issues, training to focus on customer service and an inclusive culture, and mobility aid handling, finding ways to get it right every single time. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kedzir. Next, we have Ms. Hogan. Ms. Hogan, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to discuss the findings of our audit of accessible transportation for persons with disabilities, which was tabled in the House of Commons in March 2023. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Joining me today are Milan de Dvorak, principal who was responsible for the audit, and Susie Fortier, the director who led the audit team. Every person has a right to participate fully and equally in society. Some people in Canada have to constantly fight for rights that others take for granted as basic rights. More than 1 million persons with disabilities who traveled on a federally regulated mode of transportation in 2019 and 2020 faced a barrier. When access to basic human rights is delayed or is denied, the impact is that some members of society are left behind. This audit did not directly examine airlines or airport authorities. It examined the Canadian Transportation Agency, which is the federal regulator, and Via Rail, and the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority, which are two Crown corporations that provide transportation services. We looked at whether these three organizations work to identify, remove, and prevent barriers for travelers with disabilities.
Overall, we found that all three organizations had taken steps to identify, reduce, and prevent barriers faced by persons with disabilities. But there is still much more work to do. While our report included findings and recommendations related to rail transportation, I will focus my remarks on air transportation, which is the subject of the committee's study. The inspections of transportation service providers that the Canadian Transportation Agency carried out as part of its oversight of all transportation modes served to identify and remove some barriers. However, the agency was limited in the type and number of inspections it could conduct, and it did not have the authority to access service providers' complaint data to improve its oversight. This means that some barriers could be missed and remain, and that new ones could be introduced. The Canadian Air Transport Security Authority conducted an open consultation on its accessibility plan and developed training programs. However, at the time of our audit, improvements were still needed in important areas. For example, the authority's website was not fully accessible. It also was not using complaint data to improve the identification of current barriers or to prevent new ones. To further improve the accessibility of trains, planes, and other federally regulated modes of transportation, we recommended that organizations broaden their consultations with persons with disabilities, make their online content fully accessible, and use complaint data to identify, learn about, and prevent barriers. This is necessary to achieve the federal government's goal of a barrier-free Canada by 2040. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hogan. To begin our line of questioning today, we have Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, turn the floor over to you. You have 6 minutes, please.
Thank you. My first question is going to be for Ms. Stephanie Cadieux, and I want to thank all the witnesses for coming here today. I also especially want to thank you for the time that you're taking to appear before this committee and to share your very personal experience. I believe that it will help to edify our committee and let Canadians know about an aspect of traveling that's very disheartening to hear about. And these kinds of stories, I believe, will help shine light on an issue that persists. And I wish it were a new issue that we're talking about, but unfortunately, this is an old issue, and it's one of dignity and compassion. And you highlighted just how it's difficult for people to realize that a mobility aid like a wheelchair is an extension of your body, and it facilitates your independence. And it's really like losing a part of a person's body in transport. So my question to you is, do you think that there's enough training so that employees can understand the compassionate side of what really is transpiring to ensure that accessibility is more prevalent in federally regulated transport sector?
Well, thank you for the question. The short answer is no. I think there's good intentions, and I don't think necessarily that the content of the training is bad. I think the content in most cases is probably good. I think this is a situation where it needs to be repeated and repeated and repeated again. And there needs to be some enforcement and follow-up if it's not working, some change if it's not working. But ultimately, it comes down to customer service and human interaction. And some of that can't be regulated and can't be trained. Some of it is about the people. And I can tell you, there are lots of really good people doing this work and lots of really good experiences that people have. The unfortunate challenge is that unless it's every time, then we still have problems. I'll give you an example very quickly. A couple of flights ago, I was sitting waiting for the crew to put my chair on the plane, which they are doing now, which I appreciate. But there were other crew members, baggage handlers, standing on the bridge behind me. And they said something like, "What's taking so long? Why don't they just strap the wheelchair on top of the plane like they do with bikes on cars?" And it's that kind of insensitivity that allows for mobility aids to be tossed, dropped, and left behind. It's an insensitivity that training might address, it might not. But certainly if it doesn't, then I would argue there needs to be more training and it needs to be repeated. And I think that's the piece that we have to get at, and it's difficult. It takes time.
In the situation that happened to you when you discovered that your wheelchair wasn't on the flight to Vancouver, what steps did Air Canada take to rectify this situation?
Well, after a difficult evening, and once I was back home, the next morning, Air Canada did notify me that my chair was in Vancouver and they were having it delivered to me. And I did have my chair back by about 1 o'clock the following day.
How did you get home without it?
So luckily, I was at home and not traveling away from home when I arrived in Vancouver. And my husband picked me up at the airport. So once I was transported in an airport wheelchair to my car and was able to get home, my husband was able to assist me. And I had a spare wheelchair at home, luckily. Many people do not. So my experience, as traumatic as it was, and I really didn't realize how traumatic being without my chair would be, it was rectified quite quickly by the airline in my case.
And did Air Canada and CTA give you any assurances that this wouldn't happen to anybody else? And what mechanisms have they put in place to ensure that?
They can't, I would say, ensure it won't happen to anyone else. At least not yet. But they are working on it. And since that time, Air Canada has made a number of changes that they're trialing, they're testing, whether or not mobility aids like mine that can be taken apart or folded can be carried in the cabin with me, so I can be assured it's there. They've also got an app now, or an add-on to their app that will track a mobility aid when it's being put on the plane, so that the passenger can see that their chair has been loaded. So they are making good attempts to ensure this doesn't happen. It will remain to be seen how well that works over time.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kedzir. Next, we have Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to our guest today. It's great to have you talking about this particular issue. I know I do a lot of traveling on aircraft as an MP. Many of them are different size aircraft. Of course, some of the smaller ones, like those prop planes and so on. I often wonder, how do people with disabilities manage to access these aircraft? Narrow ramps, for example, that's not wide enough for a wheelchair. Narrow aisles that are difficult to maneuver in, even for somebody without a wheelchair. So when I think about the challenges that people face with disabilities, I often wonder, shake my head about what it is that airlines are not doing that they could be doing, modifying aircraft and doing different things that would be making these aircraft accessible to people in wheelchairs and with people with disabilities. So would you agree that accessibility is not just a feature or an afterthought? It is a necessity that must be at the forefront of any travel experience. And I'll put that question to Ms. Cadeau first, and then to Ms. Pijot.
Yes, ultimately. Thank you for the question. And yes, ultimately, accessibility does need to be considered from the start. Unfortunately, I would say my incident, thrust this issue into the spotlight. And if that had to happen, I'm glad it happened. The Accessible Canada Act is forcing organizations that are regulated by the federal government to take a look at this and to actually start to put that plan in place to get accessibility to the forefront, to ensure that organizations are building it in and understanding that 27% of the population has a disability and needs some form of of accommodation, and we can't be leaving them out anymore. This will take some time. Infrastructure, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, is one of the things we need to be looking at going forward. And in air travel, there will always be challenges. We have to be realistic about that. But we could do better if we were planning ahead and if we were making it a priority. I've spoken with some of the folks at Boeing and other aircraft manufacturers, and I know that they're working on these things. They do believe there are ways to do it, but they have to be asked to do it by the folks that buy their planes, and ultimately that rests with the airlines. But I think it also rests with governments to signal that this is important and that this will be a requirement down the line, like the U.S. has done now in making it clear to the airlines that accessible washrooms will be required on single-aisle aircraft in the future. These things take time to implement. We're talking about 10 or 15 years down the road now, now that they've made that commitment. So it is something we need to be thinking about for sure, and it will take time. And thankfully, I do believe with the Accessible Canada Act in place that those conversations are going to continue to be part of the urgent discussion.
Thank you, Ms. Pijot. I also asked you to comment on that, but before I do, you mentioned in your comments about accessibility being a priority, of course, and there needs to be social change and change in corporate culture. And there's more work to be done, obviously, to make more progress. So keeping in mind the first question and those comments, give you an opportunity to comment as well.
Thank you very much. Of course, I would agree with you that accessibility has to be at the forefront. And we have many tools to advance accessibilities. This includes guidelines that we provide. We provide training material on our website, particularly for small transporters. We have dispute resolution where we resolve a lot of our complaints through mediation. And we have, of course, enforcement tools. So all of this, I would say, helps, contributes to us advancing our mandate with accessibility. And hopefully also change, I would say, the environment in which transportation companies operate and how they view accessibility. I will certainly support Ms. Cadieux when she says that it's also part of the culture of an organization. Every time I meet with the CEO of an air company, I raise the issue of accessibility. We are also working with people with disability and industry together to make sure that there is a good communication and people are sensitized the right way to improve accessibility. Just this summer, for example, we were working with small transporters and we took people with us who have disability, and we used some small transporters to Whitehorse and Dawson City to Sept-Îles, and to make sure that we understood the reality. So this is certainly something that is very important, and we want to move to do it. I want to acknowledge that the work that the committee here is doing is actually very helpful in, I would say, advancing the culture of companies and of the overall transportation system with respect to accessibility, and I would say putting accessibility at the forefront. You have, heard some from Air Canada, from WestJet, some of the measures that they are taking, and I think that the work that you're doing certainly is helping.
Thank you for that. Merci. And I'll follow up with another question.
Unfortunately, Mr. Rogers, you're out of time for this round.
Really?
Unfortunately.
Sorry. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers, and merci, Madame Peugeot.
Thank you, Madame Peugeot. Mr. Barcelo Duval, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. And also thank you to our witnesses today. I particularly want to thank Madame Cadieux for her testimony, because that has made us more aware of the difficulties that persons who live with disabilities have to face when they travel. We who don't face that difficulty are just not conscious of their needs. And you know, if you have to spend 6 or 8 hours in a plane and have no possibility of using the washroom, or it must not be easy. It must not be easy. So thank you, Madame Cadieux. But I do have a question. I don't know if you've followed the work of the committee to date, but in another meeting, there was a representative of an organization who said that airline companies had an obligation. In a sense, some persons with disabilities have to buy 2 tickets, particularly on international flights as well as national flights. How would you feel if you were asked to buy 2 tickets because you have reduced mobility?
I appreciate, actually, in this case, that Canada, the country, is leading the global air travel world in this space with the one person, one fare policy. It is not the case other places. This is something that is unique to Canada. So I will recognize that interjurisdictional issues and business competition issues add complexity to this. But from purely an accessibility perspective, I would suggest that at a minimum, if a carrier themselves requires a person with a disability to travel with a caregiver, then that person with the disability should not be financially disadvantaged by that requirement of an airline. That it is difficult to balance all of the challenges here. But yes, people with disabilities are often faced with additional costs. The costs of their equipment alone are different than what someone else would deal with. The costs of travel is definitely often more than others. But certainly if the requirement to have a caregiver attend is the requirement of the airline, then that should be at their cost.
Merci. Peut-être.
Thank you. I'd like to hear Madame Peugeot I'd like to hear her on the same subject. Yes, of course. Thank you. Just to get back to what Madame Cadieux was saying, to our knowledge, Canada is the only country where this requirement of one person, one ticket is in place. The Canadian Transportation Agency is regulated by a number of bilateral agreements with other countries, and that is the framework within which international air travel is conducted. But there is one dimension, one aspect to that. The price of ticket is not being regulated. The companies have to follow the law of the market and price according to the market, what the market can bear. And we can't regulate that. So one person, one ticket, if that were to be put in place internationally, it would be very likely rejected by many other international companies. If you were to decide to try to do that, complaints have been made to the agency to that effect, but it has not been implemented internationally. Well, thank you. I don't know if the interpretation with respect to international practices, the bottom line, the final result that is involved might lead to some different results. It seems to me that there are some policies that if you had some courage, you would be able to put in place. Another question for the CTA. What is the role of the CTA? in airports where people with mobility restrictions require services. What type of service do they require? Do they get it? For example, people who have some difficulty in terms of mobility, are there people there to assist them when they get on board the plane? What is the role of the CTA in supervising that? Or do you just receive complaints, or do you have an active role, a proactive role, putting in place regulations? Do you monitor that? Do you have anything to do with the rules that are in place? Just to complete my previous answer, we want to be able to encourage other countries to follow our lead in terms of our policy. But to come back to what you have asked, is there someone there to help people who have disabilities to come into the airport, to go to the desk, to get their boarding pass, and so on? That is the responsibility of the airport. But our role certainly is to answer any complaints when complaints occur. Yes, unfortunately, there is no more time.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses. This is an important study, and you've already contributed to it in a big way. I too will start with Ms. Cadieux, and thank you for being here and sharing your personal perspective and your professional one as well. I'm not sure if you had a chance to either read or watch the committee's previous meeting on this topic. I know it's not viewed as high-rated entertainment to many Canadians, but one thing we heard from the airlines when they testified on this topic was that the high-profile cases we see in the media represent a very small fraction of the total number of flights taken by people with disabilities. And I raise this because, to me, it stands in stark contrast to the message that you've shared with us today, which is that as long as we see these stories in the media, as long as people with disabilities are experiencing trouble on flights, we have a problem that we need to fix. What do you make of that testimony by the airlines?
Well, thank you. Nice to see you. You spoke at the last meeting about a number of distressing examples that have happened, and the responses certainly express care, but they lack, I think, the required urgency. And the defensive insistence upon returning to the language about 99% of passengers travel without incident does unfortunately minimize the 1% that are experiencing debilitating and dehumanizing situations. The data is a challenge, and it's one of the reasons I've pointed to it in my report and across all areas of accessibility. But the challenge that I know exists in the data is that when we talk about any person with a disability who might travel, that's a very wide range of situations. Somebody that might need assistance through the airport, but not on the plane, somebody who needs to be transferred to manually transferred, someone who has an allergy. And I'm sure many people travel without incident. However, I know I had 3 incidents last year alone where there were issues. I know there were 16 more faced by people I know very personally in my very small circle that happened within about a 6-month period last year. Many more reached out to my office after my incident, and certainly I don't know all of the people that have traveled. But if that alone is the situation, that concerns me. I don't know anyone with a disability personally that hasn't had an issue traveling. And so that data matters, and that's why I talked about the need for much more discrete data. How many people with disabilities traveled? How many people with manual wheelchairs? How many people with power wheelchairs? How many people with one of those filed a complaint? How many of those people who didn't file a complaint had damage to their chair that was fixed, but it wasn't captured in the complaints? The complexity is there.
On the topic of data, and this seems to be a very important point for the committee's inquiry, it seems that right now Canada is relying on self-reported data by airlines. Some airlines are willing to share data, some aren't. We know from Ms. Hogan's work and her recent report that when the office looked at CATSA, there was an extraordinarily high percentage of complaints that were miscategorized. Correct me if I'm wrong, we don't know what percentage of complaints at the airlines are miscategorized because we have no transparency on the data. Is that something that should be remedied?
I believe better data is needed everywhere. And certainly I understand that that's difficult. But data is always interesting from that perspective. If you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the right results. And I think that it is important that we have the data because I think it's clear. They do a lot of things right. And if they're doing a lot of things right, then those aren't areas where we need to fix things. But where are those pain points? And we're only going to get to that if we have much more specific data.
The United States has a different system. In the United States, the airlines are required to report the data according to specifications outlined in the regulations. They report that data to the FAA, and it's publicly transparent, so people can see where there's improvement, where problems remain. Should Canada not take a lesson from our American neighbors in this regard?
I think we often do things differently for good reason. And I think it's important that whatever we do, that it be clear if we're comparing apples to apples or oranges to oranges or not. And so I think it's necessary that we move in a direction where we have more data available. And I think we can do an even better job than the United States at working at ensuring that we're getting the information we want and need from the data to ultimately change for the better the experiences of people with disabilities.
On this specific point around data, who leads internationally? Who should we be looking to?
I don't think from my reach out so far and from what I'm hearing, I don't know that anybody's got it right yet. And the reason I say that is I spoke at the IATA conference in October, and what's clear is that airlines and the air sector knows that accessibility is an issue everywhere. It's now on the agenda, and that's the first step, and that's really important, like it is that we are here at this committee. The fact that we're talking about it is a good first step, and I think we have opportunity to lead in terms of how we respond.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Thank you, Ms. Kedzior. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for taking time out on this important study. And I have some questions for the Attorney General or the Auditor General. I'm giving you a promotion, or maybe not, maybe a demotion. I don't know. But I want to first ask a question of the CTA as a follow-up to the line of questioning from Mr. Barcelou-Duval, because we had some discussion at the last meeting about this this policy of the one person, one fare, and I would challenge the answer that you gave because to me this seems like a no-brainer. It's a very clear discrepancy, and you know these are Canadian airports, Canadian air space, Canadian laws, and yet this double standard still persists where internationally we're not applying that policy, and that seems like a very easy thing to remedy, and perhaps what's missing is the will of the CTA and the government to actually do it.
Thank you for your question. As I've mentioned, there are international agreements that governs how the air transportation is happening, and that would be constitute a problem with those agreements. So, if we were to
There's also
impose
international
it,
conventions like the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and of which Canada is a signatory. So we're not following through on that.
For sure, and that's why we actually work a lot with, ICAO, for the Civil Aviation Organization internationally, we've supported the development of a compendium that highlights the best practices across various countries with respect to people with disability. And we certainly talk about our one person, one fare when we go to international forum to encourage other countries to take such measures. But those countries have not even taken this measure domestically within their own country.
Okay, let me switch gears just because my time is limited to the Auditor General. So I know you indicated in your study of transport that air transport wasn't the primary focus of or wasn't the singular focus of what you were studying in terms of the issues. But I'm wondering, the lack of significant fines has caused bad behavior to persist. And did you look at the levels of fines being levied by the CTA and whether they were at the appropriate level, were they the level to change behavior? Was that part of your study at all?
So I guess to explain a little my mandate, I cannot audit private corporations, and airlines are exactly that. While they are federally regulated, I can only look at federal entities, and so we did not, in our audit of the Transportation Authority, look at fines levied. We looked at their oversight and inspection of the regulations.
So not the fines levied by the federal regulator.
No, we did not cover that.
Okay. Is that a future potential mandate?
There's so much to do in the area of accessibility. We'll take it under advisement, absolutely. But this was our first chance looking at it since the Accessibility Act was so new, and it's definitely on the horizon to revisit at some point.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I'll go back to the CTA and ask that, what were the fines levied, and do you feel they're appropriate to change behavior? And if they're not working, is there an escalation? How does this work?
Mm-hmm. We do believe that to improve accessibility, we do need to use various tools. I've mentioned about information, like training available on our website, etc. So for sure, enforcement is a key aspect of it. Enforcement, just like other regulatory agencies, is used to achieve compliance, not as a punitive measure. That being said, what we have done over the last year is, first of all, we've increased our enforcement capacity. We've more than tripled the number of inspections that we have done. And when we look at the administrative monetary penalty, we increased so far by 270%.
Can I ask what the maximum fine that has been levied thus far for an accessibility issue? I mean, we've heard the stories of anguish. Yeah. I mean, this is not insignificant.
Yeah, the maximum fine we've given so far is around $100,000. And the way it works is there is always an increment. So if the same type of violation would happen, then we would, of course, give an increased fine.
And how many of those have been?
Merci, Madame Peugeot. Thank you, Mr. Muse. Next, prochainement, nous avons Madame Koutrakis. À vous la parole. 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Madame Koutrakis. Thank you.
Other witnesses that are here today, and we've heard some very important testimony, and I was very encouraged to hear that you find the work that we are doing here at this committee is very helpful to you, and this is indeed a very important study, so thank you for taking time to be here with us today. I'm sure that just to follow with what my good colleague, Mr. Bachrach, said earlier, we may not be the #1 entertainment, but I'm sure the folks here today do follow us very carefully and diligently. So at a previous meeting, WestJet was here, and they assured us that they've got training programs in place, and documentation does show us that they do have training. But the training that they spoke of happens once every 3 years. So I'd like to start my question to the Auditor General and her team from the office. Do you think that once every 3 years to receive training is adequate? If not, what should it be?
The current regulation does require for training to happen within 60 days of someone beginning their role, and then a refresh once every 3 years. And the answer would honestly be depends how often it should happen, because there's such constant turnover. And as you would hope, there would be folks who move to different roles, different positions. There is likely the need for training on a much more regular basis than just once every 3 years. I worry when there's a requirement like that it's sometimes treated as a we've done it, and instead of really caring about what it is. So I think that the regulations right now are such, but I would hope that folks would see the need to do it more focused, maybe on new equipment, specialized equipment, as new fleets are introduced, as new methods are brought about. Those refreshers are likely needed more regularly.
And Ms. Cadieux, would you like to offer some insight as someone that has faced with those challenges? And, just by the examples that you shared with us, it clearly demonstrates to me anyway that there is a lack of training. So what would you like to see airlines and throughout the entire ecosystem, actually, what types of training should be in place and who should be responsible for what?
Well, it is complex, and the system is complex. It's not just the airlines, but it's the ground crews, it's the airports, and it's how all of those interact. An airline might have their own crews in one location and not their own crews in another location, and that certainly is the case internationally when we fly outside of the country, into Europe, for example, or into the U.S. The crews there are not staff of the airlines. So while they can influence training and while they can demand a certain response, there is a complexity, and I think it's important to recognize that. That said, it doesn't excuse it, and we need to find better solutions. And training is important, and retraining is important, but so are the consequences when things go wrong. If there are no consequences to action, to problems, then that allows problems to repeat. And so I think that's a really important thing to remember. And it's not just about how do we handle mobility aids. That's one thing. But how do we ensure customer service for somebody who's blind, to give them the layout of the lavatory so they don't have to pat around the whole lavatory to find the flush button. These things are also important. And how do you handle all of that in the training? And role-specific training is important. So I can't say enough about the need for training, but it comes down to that human element and that customer service mentality. Do we want to be the best or not? And that will vary between airlines, between airports, and between countries.
So in all of my professional career in finance before finding this new role in my life, I was always involved in an industry that aimed and deliver superior client service. So when I hear you comment about receiving the client service and the standard not being there, I have to tell you, I almost feel like, lifting my sleeves and saying, okay, how could we do better? And what can I do as a member of parliament to make sure that happens? Because that's incredibly important. And it adds to, providing end-to-end service, which leads into my question. What types of things are we putting in place to make sure that the end-to-end service and the overall client experience is there, not for the average, passenger, but passengers with disabilities, passengers that do need that extra help? What would you say the CTA could do to make sure that is applied throughout the system?
15-second response, please.
The current regulation prescribes for end-to-end service, and we certainly respond to various complaints with respect to that, but we also have our inspectors that monitor the situation.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Peugeot. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou Duval.
Next, Mr. Barcelou Duval, 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Madame Peugeot from the CTA, I'll come back to you with respect to this notion of one person, one fare. I've been told that in terms of air transportation, elsewhere under 6A, it is mentioned very clearly that the authorities can intervene to, in the case of some unreasonable tariffs that are assigned to tickets. See, it can also be in the case of where somebody is larger than other people and would, because of their body mass, would require a larger seat. And I just draw that to your attention. Now I'd like to turn to another issue. The regulation with respect to airline transportation. April 20th last, it was announced by the government that there would be major changes under C-47, which was supposed to come into effect in June 22nd of last year, and that complaints would have to be dealt with in 30 days, that there would be compensation for anybody who complained that was found to be in order by the CTA. That was supposed to be in place September 30th, 2023. Now we're almost March 2024. What is happening? Why is there this delay? The government certainly has brought forward some advances in the terms of consumer traveler protection. With respect to the 30 days, that's in place. And there is another measure with respect to the adjudication of the complaints that is in place. We are able to publish in the Canada Gazette Part 1 all the regulations in the coming months. Well, we talk about the slow processing of these complaints. About 61,000 untreated, unprocessed cases are still in abeyance. What accounts for that delay? We're at 65,000 now, unprocessed cases, and that represents some 18 months. It's something that we're working on, and I have to say that just last year, we had 40,000 complaints. This year, it will probably be about the same. In January alone, we had 4,000 complaints. Thank you, Mr. Barcelo-Duval. Can I ask a question about this? Yes. How many passengers? Complaints, but with respect to how many passengers that were carried last year? Well, that's a good question. I can also give you that in writing, and normally we were looking at 8,000 per year, but there has been an explosion in the number of complaints.
The floor is yours. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Peugeot, would the CTA be willing to table with the committee information about all of the fines that have been issued with respect to accessibility challenges or complaints? Obviously, with the privacy data redacted, but I think the committee would really benefit from seeing how many fines have been levied, for what amount, and in what kinds of different scenarios.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
On our website, and just quickly, like just last year, we gave $146,000 in terms of fine, and this year alone, so far, and there's just talking about accessibility here, we have given $536,000. That being said,
they sound like big numbers to Canadians, I think. These are very large corporations for whom paying that kind of fine seems to be the cost of doing business. So the question is always about whether the fines are achieving any sort of objective in terms of improving behavior. But I'll leave that for now because I only have 2.5 minutes. My question, I'd like to follow up on this one person, one fare issue. And it's been pointed out by my colleague that international law, these international treaties expressly permit the prevention of pricing based on to prevent discriminatory pricing practices, which it would seem that one person, one fare falls clearly into that category. It's a discriminatory pricing policy to require someone with a disability to purchase 2 fares for one trip. The APPR, the Air Passenger Protection Regulations, those apply to international flights. Those are Canadian, it's Canadian law. The CTA applies it to international flights, both arriving in Canada and departing from Canada. Why not the one passenger, one fare rule?
Most countries have air passenger protection regulations. So the one person, one fare actually is only in Canada. We're the only country. And actually, so for example, the United States does not have this type of measures, doesn't even have like a measure like we have where we provide pain and suffering compensation and reckless behavior compensation to individuals. This is something that actually we have here in Canada that is not there.
I guess what I'm trying to drill down on is the CTA claiming that there's a legal reason that they can't apply the one person or one passenger, one fare policy to international flights? Or are you claiming that we're simply not doing it because other countries don't do it and we don't want to get out too far ahead of other countries?
No, what I'm saying is essentially because other countries don't have one person, one fare, it would be contradicting. It would impose some pricing issues that would go against international agreements, and this has been.
But the bilateral treaties, and Mr. Barcelou-Duval read out the section of the bilateral with the United States, it expressly says that that's permitted, that intervention in pricing to prevent, quote, unreasonably discriminatory prices or practices is fair game. Why doesn't the CTA take that up?
Yeah, well, this is certainly something we'll have to look into, but the advice we have received from Transport Canada and Global Affairs, who are really the ones managing those international agreements, is...
Merci, Madame
Sounds like
Dejeau.
we should bring them to committee. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, you have 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Cadieux, I only have 3 minutes, so I'll dive right in. It was mentioned in passing by one of the airlines, WestJet, at the last meeting, that the European model for persons with disabilities is that the airport authorities are responsible to ensure accessibility requirements are met kind of from the time the person parks their car or is dropped off to the time they're actually seated in the aircraft is what I've read. It seems to me that that is something worth examining in Canada. Have you done any work like that? And perhaps could you give us your professional opinion and would you have any personal advice as well? As we look at that, it seems that there's less handoffs to me if an airport, which is responsible for the parking lot all the way to the gate, to the bridge, to all of it, is actually responsible, and that the airline concentrates on helping individuals when they're actually on the aircraft. What are your thoughts on that, and have you studied that model at all?
I haven't studied it. I have experienced it. And certainly in my conversations with other advocates and individuals with disabilities from other countries who travel, I'm not sure that any of the systems is great at this moment. And certainly I would say that if you talk to individuals from different countries, what they are most comfortable with is the one that they're most used to. That said, I think everything's on the table in terms of how do we do this better. And Accessibility Standards Canada is looking at developing a standard on accessible journeys and what that looks like. And ultimately, whatever the solutions the sector comes up with, as long as it provides consistent, safe, dignified service, and service that looks the same for me, essentially, as it does for you, then I think that would be the right solution.
Okay. And have you experienced, or have the people you've talked to in your circle, are those handoffs, if I can call them that, is that a place where there are breakdowns, or have you found that those are pretty well navigated?
It definitely is a place where there are breakdowns. Mostly reliant on I would say whether or not there has been adequate planning and staffing, and this is an area where I think there's room for for government and the sector to sort of work together. There's also a piece that is important for people with disabilities to know about how they participate in this process in terms of letting an organization know they're coming. And if that is in place, then organizations can ensure the staff is there. If they don't know, that obviously creates challenges for them. So I think there's room for the airlines and government, the regulators, to come together to help inform and educate on both sides of the equation.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl, and thank you, Ms. Kedzier. Next and finally for this round, we have Mr. Badaway. Mr. Badaway, the floor is yours. 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, I want to say thank you to all of you for being here today. There's no doubt that it's going to add to the testimony, which will then add to the final report and, of course, response from the minister. I had the opportunity to go to the GTAA and tour the airport last Thursday or Friday? Thursday, thank you. And discuss with them their accessibility action plan 2023-2026 and the processes of the internal action plans, the communications, their long-term goals, as well as the overall experience and environment that they're trying to provide the customer and as well their employees, quite frankly. So I'm going to dive right into it and ask Ms. Hogan, I guess, first off, many of the recommendations were directed directly to the sectors. However, not granular, directly directed to the airlines. You do mention VIA a few times, but ultimately to the airlines you don't. You just basically tend to recommend based on sector. So my question to you, Ms. Hogan, is that what recommendations would you actually make, being a bit more granular to the airlines, et cetera, within those sectors? Any regulatory actions, whether it be government, whether it be the CTA or other, from your discussions, and I would only assume, for example, you had discussions with the CTA with regard to applicable accessibility-related legislation, to encourage, and I want to underline this statement, to encourage being proactive versus reactive, which often the CTA is, and with a whole of sector approach, including the airlines. And then hopefully, once we have that discussion and those recommendations, those with a disability won't need the CTA because we're being more proactive than reactive. That's question number one. Question number two is, how important is it for the airlines to be required to release their disability-related complaint data ASAP so we recognize the scope of the problem? And therefore, as well, the CTA can be involved if need be to react to those complaints. And to that question, will C-52 be an enabler to this? And then my last question is this, and it sort of goes outside the scope of today, but it's something that I have to deal with often in my writing. Do you think there's a need to expand the study to include the effects of airline and rail operations, underline operations, on disabled people?
So I've hopefully taken good notes. So I'll start off with the first question. I cannot make recommendations to airlines. They are not a part of the federal government. So my mandate stops and starts with auditing the federal government and crown corporations, which is why Via Rail.
Just to that, Ms. Hogan, but you can make recommendations to those that can make recommendations.
I can
to
absolutely make recommendations to the Canadian Transportation Agency
Exactly.
as we have, but I cannot recommend policy. That's for policymakers. I look at how policy is implemented and put in place by federal organizations. So when it came to the Canadian Transportation Agency, we made a few around their inspections. And the better access to data. So when it came to inspections, we found that many of them were just looking at the design of an inspection. So on paper, it might look that the service was really well laid out and designed, but it's the actual implementation and lived experience of a person with a disability that needs to be looked at. So we recommended that they look more at sort of the operating implementation. These are on-demand services, right? It's not something that someone might provide every single day. So actually seeing it in action is a better way to improve. Are the regulations the right thing, and as our follow-up the right thing? When it comes to complaint data, so linked to your second question, then linked to airlines, we definitely saw it as a gap that in the United States, Air Canada, for example, would be required to report certain complaints or damage to a wheelchair, whereas in Canada, it's only if the individual chooses to report a complaint to the Canadian Transportation Authority that they would be made aware of it. Not having access to complete data, I think, limits the opportunity to decide if regulations are enough or if inspections are enough. So obviously, better data. I echo many of the comments that Ms. Kedzior made before, and I would tell you that it's about even intersectionality, and the more data and the better data that folks can have to play with is always good. Then when it comes to the effects that all of this have, well, I think understanding the lived experiences, getting consultation with individuals with disability will only improve regulations and inspections and so on. And I think part of the Accessibility Act, one of the key lines is nothing without us. And that needs to happen at every stage, even when you're designing a new regulation, not once it's in place to see the impacts of it. So I think it's a full spectrum analysis that's needed.
Thank you, Mr. Badaway, and thank you, Ms. Hogan. And I want to thank all of our witnesses for giving their time so generously today and contributing to this very important study for all Canadians. I'm going to suspend the meeting for a few minutes to allow the clerk and her team to welcome the next round of witnesses. This meeting stands suspended. To order. We will now continue with our testimony, and to do that, we will turn it over to our witnesses, which are from the Canadian Airports Council, Monette Pasher, President, welcome. From the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, we have Karush Minocher, Executive Director, Customer Experience and Airline Relations, joining us by video conference. Welcome to you, sir. And from the Vancouver Airport Authority, we have Tamara Vrooman, President and Chief Executive Officer, once again joining us by video conference. We'll begin with our opening remarks, and for that, I will turn it over to you, Ms. Pasher. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for the invitation to appear today and discuss the current study on accessibility transportation for persons with disability regulations. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people and pay respects to elders past and present. I'm pleased to be appearing here today and to have my colleagues Tamara and Karush here with me virtually. Canadian Airport Council represents over 100 airports, including all of the national airport system airports and most passenger service airports in every province and territory, which handle all of the nation's air cargo and international passenger traffic and 90% of our domestic air travel as well. Accessibility in the travel journey is more than regulatory compliance. It's about ensuring that all passengers, regardless of a need, have a seamless, respectful, and dignified experience. This really is our North Star. And we are shaping our objectives and activities as an association around this goal. Certainly, there are imperfections and things can go wrong, and they shouldn't. But we want to learn, improve, and aim higher for all passengers at Canada's airports. With this objective, over the last several years, CAC and Canada's airports have focused our attention on taking action. Over the last year, the CAC has collaborated with the learning management system experts, Harper Learning, to design a new national training program on accessibility in Canadian airports. The goal is to offer a nationally consistent program to train all airport authority employees and offered attendants, not just on regulatory requirements, but on how they can best assist a person with a disability at every step of their journey through the airport. Further, we have also begun work to develop a 5-year roadmap on accessibility for our airports in order to move forward on the broader goal of a barrier-free travel in Canada by 2040. As it stands, Canadian airports have many innovative programs in place that also follow the regulatory requirements established by Transport Canada and CTA in order to make the passenger journey a better one for people with disabilities. But most airports really do go above and beyond the CTA requirements. Airports care deeply about making tangible improvements to continually raise the bar and better serve passengers. In addition, the CAC leads an accessibility working group with subject matter experts on the passenger journey and operations. This working group meets monthly to discuss current issues and challenges faced in our airports and helps provide peer guidance and best practices in planning and implementation so we can learn from each other on accessibility efforts in airports from coast to coast. With over 100 airports, CAC members range from YVR and YYZ that are here with me today, but also, Hamilton, Nanaimo, many small airports across the country. When it comes to the larger airports, they have the technology and infrastructure to be some of the most accessible airports in the world, and that is many of their goal. And some of them are working on world accessibility accreditation now in that program, and a number of them have it as well. So we are taking those global steps. For Pearson, it's about crafting an experience that prioritizes ease and inclusivity. For Montreal, it's about fostering meaningful progress, partnerships with both industry professionals and individuals with disabilities. And for Winnipeg, it's about continuing to develop programs and initiatives such as passenger rehearsal programs, pet relief stations, and increasing signage containing Braille. Regional and smaller airports continue to strive to upgrade technology, infrastructure, staffing, and communications for travelers with disabilities. Many are working with the Rick Hansen Foundation and going through their audit program. This program is national in scope and rates meaningful access based on the user's experience for people with varying disabilities affecting their mobility, vision, and hearing. The Canadian Airport Council and our member airports are ready to work with the members of this committee to strengthen the journey for all passengers, and we look forward to your questions and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pasher. Next, we have Mr. Minocher. I'm going to get that right. Minocher. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, sir. And thank you to the committee for the opportunity to appear as part of this important study into the accessible transportation for persons with disabilities in Canada. My name is Karush Minocher. I'm the Executive Director of Customer Experience and Airline Relations at the Greater Toronto Airports Authority. We're the operating authority of Toronto Pearson International Airport. We're always happy to work with the committee on issues related to our sector, and I look forward to our questions today. As Canada's largest airport, Toronto Pearson has worked hard to identify, remove, and prevent barriers for travel for all persons with disabilities, both visible and invisible. In a typical year, we see more than 1 million passengers with disabilities pass through the airport. Implementing accessible and inclusive programs and services not only enriches the travel experience for all our passengers, but also cultivates a supportive and positive work environment for our employees. Above all, our vision is to make our airport the most accessible. Whether you're traveling with family, accompanied by a caregiver, or making your way independently from curb to gate, our commitment is to ensure that a journey that's seamless is also welcoming and enjoyable. I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about what the GTA is doing to ensure an accessible travel journey for everyone at Pearson. In 2023, we launched our 3-year accessibility plan. It's our roadmap to creating and maintaining impactful accessibility in our policies, programs, practices, and services. We work to proactively identify, prevent, and remove barriers that offer meaningful access at Pearson. Our action plan is organized into several key areas and includes the built environment, transportation to and from the terminals, technologies that support your experience at Pearson, and the design and delivery of various services. Our plan also addresses our employment and procurement policies. While I could spend a lot of time today talking about each of these areas, I want to focus on the services and programs available to help passengers with disabilities navigate the airport experience. We're constantly working towards ensuring our programs and services enable more choice, comfort, and greater independence as passengers move through the airport. In anything we do, we consistently involve people with lived experience in testing our facilities, driving continuous adaptation and innovation. For passengers with mobility concerns, there are more than 1,500 wheelchairs available for use in the terminals. For those who wish to navigate the airport either independently or with their travel companion, these are available without the need for pre-arrangement. We're also proud to say that Pearson was the first airport in Canada to launch the Sunflower Lanyard campaign. This program offers a subtle means for passengers with hidden disabilities to indicate to staff that they might require a little additional assistance or time. And in collaboration with organizations like the Lions Foundation of Canada, with WestJet and CATSA, we host a monthly guide dog familiarization program. This initiative helps dogs in training get accustomed to the airport environment, but also allows our staff to gain insights on best practices directly from trainers. And as we continuously research, learn, and adopt user-friendly digital tools that have built-in accessibility, we will continue to integrate them into all aspects of the passenger journey. There are hundreds of brand new, fully accessible self-service kiosks throughout the airport, through parking, check-in, at customs, and these all feature the latest in universal technology capabilities. To help with wayfinding, we offer Aira and Blind Square for passengers who are blind or partially sighted. Aira is a free app on airport grounds that provides live, on-demand navigation assistance, while Blind Square uses beacons for verbal navigation. And to ensure there's public awareness for these services and programs available at Pearson, all of this information is available on our website, which was designed to be accessible for all. Finally, we recognize that none of our work at Pearson would be possible without the hard work of the 1,800 staff who work for the GTAA and the 50,000 employees broadly across 400 organizations operating at Toronto Pearson. Our workforce is diversifying more every year, and we want to continue attracting and retaining talent inclusive of people with disabilities. And as a global gateway for Canada, we are excited about our progressive journey towards creating a fully barrier-free Toronto Pearson. We recognize that passengers and employees should not have to adapt their needs and have them met, and that we are taking steps necessary to integrate universal and human-centered design throughout the airport. Thank you for the invitation to participate in the study, and I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Minocher. Next, we'll go to Ms. Vrooman. Ms. Vrooman, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to join the committee remotely from my office at the Vancouver International Airport, where we're located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. YVR has a deep relationship with Musqueam through our sustainability and friendship agreement, and I too would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Thank you very much to the committee for inviting me to participate in this important study and to talk a little bit about the work that we've been doing at the Vancouver International Airport. YVR has demonstrated a clear commitment to accessibility for many years. We are the first airport in North America to voluntarily have our entire airport space audited and rated by a group of independent accessibility experts through the Rick Hansen Foundation's Building Accessibility Program. Going beyond ramps and lifts, the audit identified improvements in everything from the color palette of floor tiles to the sound barriers needed in walls to the widths of corridors and counters. YVR accepted 100% of the recommendations, and they have all been implemented. As a result, in 2018, we became the first airport in the world to achieve gold accessibility building rating standards from the RHF program, something we have maintained at YVR each and every year since. But I'm pleased to say that we didn't stop there. We continue to look for ways to improve our facilities to ensure that people can move independently and with dignity throughout our airport. For example, at all of our new private single-stall washrooms also include adult-sized changing benches and the latest technology for accessible features. Most recently, we're the first airport to include key boarding announcements in sign language at all of our boarding gates. But the built environment at YVR, we have gone beyond and designed important supports with accessibility consultants, community partners, and customers. We know that buildings alone cannot make travel accessible. It also requires inclusive processes and trained staff to ensure the experience of transiting through an airport is supportive and seamless. Traveling through an airport can be stressful at the best of times. Imagine what it might be like for people who are sound or light sensitive, who are neurodiverse, or who are on the autism spectrum. Through YVR's partnership with the Canucks Autism Network, we organized dedicated tours to allow to date over 400 families to practice the entire pre-flight process with us in a safe and supportive environment. Having practiced it, families tell us it gives them the confidence that when they do travel, often for the first time as a family, they know what to expect and how and where YVR offers supports along the way. But as we say at YVR, running an airport is a team sport. At YVR, 26,000 people work at our airport each and every day. To create a truly accessible airport, our team members at multiple levels need to be trained and ready to serve the needs of diverse passengers. Therefore, through a partnership with the Pacific Autism Family Network and through a partnership with the work that you've already heard about through the Canadian Airports Council, YVR is providing training for everyone, from our fire and rescue team to our guest experience staff to our building, maintenance, and cleaning staff, to ensure we have the skills and expertise to support passengers whenever and wherever they may need it. Finally, as one of our region's largest employers, we also know that we can create meaningful employment for people with diverse abilities. In October 2023, we opened the Paper Planes Cafe here in the terminal in partnership with the Pacific Autism Family Network. Through the cafe, we offer individuals with neurodiverse needs up to 6 months of training, and then we support them in their job search in the community. The first group of trainees have completed the program and gone on to secure employment. And now we have a waiting list for new applicants. Our journey to become a truly accessible airport started with our building, quickly moved to our staff and services we provide, and finally extended to our significant role as an employer. But despite all of that, we believe we can and need to do more. Over the last 18 months, YVR completed a comprehensive audit of our full passenger experience. We partnered with the accessibility group Return on Disability to purchase airline tickets for over 40 individuals with accessibility needs to track the entire experience from booking a ticket through to travel. As a result, we have identified several opportunities that YVR will explore in the future. For example, we're working collaboratively with partners to create a seamless experience from curb to gate. An immediate opportunity is for YVR to leverage our technology to track wheelchair flow and maximize availability in the airport. We're also simplifying our wayfinding and signage, and we're exploring digital wayfinding and mobile navigation tools. And finally, we're working with the airport commercial and airline partners to better inform people about the range of accessibility services available at our airport. As I conclude, I'd like to thank the committee. These discussions help us explore new ideas and to ensure Canada's air transportation system remains accessible and continues to improve. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vrooman. We'll begin our line of questioning in this round with Mr. Strahl. And Mr. Strahl, I'm going to give you 5 minutes. We're going to have to cut back a bit of the time here to make sure we can get through all of this. So the floor is yours. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Pasher, and the two biggest airports in the country. I'm glad that you're here to talk about your built environment. I think we heard, obviously, these are world-class facilities that have world-class facilities for people with accessibility challenges. I think I'm interested to hear perhaps from Ms. Pasher. You mentioned the number of airports that you represent, and I am glad that YVR and YYZ are here. I am interested to hear about the smaller regional airports that don't have the same level of financing or the same perhaps programming ability. What is the Airports Council doing to ensure that a passenger that perhaps isn't traveling through Vancouver International or Pearson is getting the same level of care, the same level of respect, the same level of service at a airport that perhaps doesn't have the same level of resources?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Happy to take that on. Many small airports across the country and regional airports are part of the accessibility regulations, and certainly some of the new regulations that rolled out need to be implemented by June. Many of our airports have already taken these measures and implemented them, things like pet relief areas, hearing loops, signage in the airport. They're implementing change tables where they can. I think the biggest challenge that we see for I'm talking small airports, would be, when you're talking about infrastructure that's 60 years old, some of our airports are municipal airports. It can be more challenging to make those infrastructure changes. I think many of them are adopting the technology and the programs and the signage and the things that we can do operationally within the airport, but the infrastructure piece and really to get to that Rick Hansen Gold certified level is quite difficult for an old building, right? So if you're talking about, needing to change many things about actually the structure, I mean, that's cost. And I think that would be probably the biggest barrier for small airports. But I think you'd be surprised to see the amount of initiatives they've taken on, from autism aviators to the Sunflower program. Like, there's so many, and they really are downsizing them and making them fit.
Okay, thank you. I want to go quickly to Ms. Vrooman, perhaps. The airport I travel through the most is yours. We often hear about luggage or handling, in this case, mobility aids. I assume that is a shared responsibility between the airlines and the airport. Am I correct in that? Or perhaps you could talk to me about from the time that someone who requires a mobility aid to get onto an aircraft, what role does YVR play in that, and how are you working to ensure that the unacceptable examples that we've heard of even today, where equipment, life it's things that are not simply luggage, but are necessary for the respect and dignity of a person with a disability, that those get onto the aircraft. What specific steps have you taken to upgrade your performance in that regard?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. You are correct that it is a shared accountability, and it works this way at the airport. So the airport provides the infrastructure that takes the baggage when you drop it off through to the apron, where it's then picked up by the baggage and ground handlers and loaded onto the aircraft. And then on the way out, when baggage is unloaded, it's the responsibility of the baggage handlers, which are contracted by airlines, to take that baggage from the aircraft and load it through onto the carousel. If there are baggage that, in this case, is not baggage at all, but as we heard, significant personal mobility aids, often they will be transported independently and not put through the regular baggage system by the airlines themselves. What we have found is, as you can hear, there's a lot of different handoffs and different processes that will work outside the regular way that baggage works at our airport. And, I'm very pleased to say that our performance on the outbound baggage, 99% of the time, sometimes even higher, all of that baggage gets to the right place at the right time. But what we need to do is make sure we use data to connect, to make sure that the bags that we see going through that are irregular actually make their way onto the aircraft.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vrooman. Next, we'll go to Ms. Murray. Ms. Murray, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes, please.
Good. Well, thank you very much, and welcome the testimony of of our guest today. I wanted to start with Ms. Pasher. We heard earlier that there is a place where there are breakdowns in the processes for supporting people with disability, and that is in the handoff between the airport authorities area of responsibility and the airlines areas of responsibility. And Ms. Cadieux, Canada's Chief Accessibility Officer, confirmed that it's not a seamless continuity there. So how, Ms. Pasher, can or does the Canadian Airports Council help identify and reduce the gaps in the handoff between the airports and the airlines?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, certainly that is an issue that we've been talking about quite a bit. This handoff is really, the airports are responsible from the curb to the check-in counter, and then the airlines and their partners are responsible from the check-in counter to the plane. So I think, when you look at that, really the North Star would be a seamless passenger experience. That's what we would like to see. I think there are many ways that we could deliver that, and that's part of what we're looking at now through pilots. Mr. Strahl mentioned Europe. I think we're looking at everything to see what are those options, what are the best practices. And I think, as Ms. Cadieux said, there are challenges everywhere in this delivery. So I think we need to look at what are the best practices, what's working well here now. Like Pearson has a seamless experience that does work well. So what can we learn from our own environment, and what can we learn from others' environments in order to make this better? I think continuous improvement is always the goal.
Thank you. So I have a question for Mr. Menashe. Mr. Menashe, you talked about the goal of the GTAA is to attract and employ dedicated people, inclusive of people with disabilities. And I just was I've been seized with the fact that the federal government has some clear targets for increasing the number of people with disabilities that are employed by the government. And I know Ms. Cadieux was very much part of that, with the rationale being that if people with that experience are designing and developing the solutions for others with disabilities, you will have better outcomes. So does the GTAA have a target number of people with disabilities that are being hired?
We're constantly increasing across the board individuals with disabilities that are brought on board into the organization and across the airport community. Specific, though, to designing programs that support the travel experience, we work directly with individuals with lived experience. Sometimes they are employees, many times they are individuals through the communities or through various advocacy groups like the Canadian National Institute for the Blind or the Canadian Hearing Society.
Well, I acknowledge that not every job can be done with every potential type of disability, but it does in the federal government. It is clearly a pathway to better addressing accessibility issues to have people with disabilities that are doing the work in that way. So I wanted to ask Ms. Vrooman, and great to see you here today, as also a Vancouver Airport user. Congratulations on your achieving gold accessibility rating, and also the supports for people, neurodiverse people. But I'd like to ask the same question as I did with Mr. Menashe. Do you have actual targets to increase the number of people with disability that you hire for the Vancouver Airport Authority to just bring that firsthand understanding and context into the work that your team does for passengers with disabilities?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. The short answer is yes. And we attempt to hire the same percentage or greater that is present in the population. One of the general challenges, though, is not everybody, particularly with less visible disabilities, self-report. So we're also creating tools to allow people to self-identify in diverse ways so we can track the percentage of people that we have employed at the airport.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vrooman. Next, prochainement, nous avons M. Barcelou-Duval. À vous la parole.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, 5 minutes, please. You have the floor. Thank you, Chair. And also, thank you to our witnesses who are here with us from the different airports. I'm going to start with Madame Pacher from the Canadian Airports Council. My first question that I want to ask, and I hope that you know how that operates, is to what extent do the various stakeholders, the actors, everybody involved in meeting the specific needs of persons with disabilities, how do they interact? You know, I'm thinking about when somebody buys a ticket, for example, they have to write it down. So what are the specific needs that someone living with disability would present at the airport? Could you give us an overview of that? Perhaps if you begin.
So in terms of, you know, when someone's booking a ticket after their ticket, so the day of travel, I mean, they can go on our websites of airports to see what services are available, and they can plan their needs that way. So in some cases, you know, a passenger can arrive and they can have, if they would like, they can have curbside assistance. Some of our airports have 24/7 access. Others have an intercom there when you can get support. And then the support comes out to meet you at curbside. They'll take you in to see the airline, and then the airline, you check in, and then you're moving through the rest of the system with them.
Je comprends votre réponse, c'est-à-dire qu'il n'y a pas de système.
So you're saying there's no system where there is communication between the airport authority and the airlines beforehand that would be able to say so many people are coming in and would require extra help. It's a system where the individuals could communicate beforehand with the airport and let them know that they are coming. Do you think that a system where you could share more information between the airport and the passenger would be better and would facilitate their travel?
Yeah, I mean, a passenger books the ticket with the air carrier. So I think, that is where, when they show up at the airport, there is a system in place. Would more data sharing and information between parties be helpful? I think it's always helpful, and we heard in the last testimony, would data be helpful in this regard? I think it would be. For smaller airports where, they're not seeing the accessible needs of passengers, quite as frequently as they are at the large. It does operate a little bit differently. And in those communities, usually people reach out in advance. We really don't get many complaints at the smaller airports. There is that personalized service, and they're used to what is in place, so they're aware.
Ma prochaine question pour vous, c'est concernant.
My next question for you deals with training. In your opening remarks, you said that information services are provided by the staff at the airport. That's natural. But you also mentioned that you do work with people who work with the passengers in the plane itself, so the crew of the plane, the onboard crew. So if I understand correctly, the airport provides the training for the onboard crew, or is that a type of complementary additional training that is added?
Thanks for asking that question, because I think it's very important to distinguish. So our airports are only responsible for our airport training and training the airport authority staff. So airlines are responsible for training airline staff and their mobility handlers. So baggage handlers, a number of different aspects of our environment. So no, what you were referring to would be actually the airlines and their specific training, which would be different than the airports and the airport employees.
Merci.
Thank you. There are people who have brought up certain issues, that there's another system elsewhere in the world. And if I understand correctly, the airports would bear the responsibility for the check-in and so on. So it seems to me that the role of airports is quite restrictive, according to what I am understanding about the situation. Do you think that greater capacity to intervene for an airport would be something that airports and the airport authorities would want and would be able to do? Short answer, please.
Sure.
Short answer, please. 15
Sure.
seconds.
Airlines are responsible for checking in their guests. Airlines are responsible for moving those guests through that environment. So if there's other countries that are doing this differently, they're doing it likely with third parties. So and they're actually working hand in hand with airlines. So this is really airlines that are moving their passengers through the airport ecosystem. And that would be our experience of what's happening elsewhere.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pasher. Merci, Mr. Barcelou-Val. Next, we have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. I think what we've heard on this panel is really that the airports, especially the big airports, are doing lots of different things. There's lots of activity. I don't think that there's any questioning that these organizations take accessibility concerns seriously, and that there's stuff going on. What I think the committee is trying to get at, though, is the trend and accountability, and trying to get some sense, some line of sight on how fast that process of improvement is occurring, and when things don't go well, what the reason for that is. I haven't heard any of the airports talk about complaint processes, so maybe I'll start there, just in terms of how complaints related to accessibility concerns are handled by airport authorities, and whether that data is disclosed publicly, what the trends are in that data, and how that could be strengthened as part of the system. Maybe I'll start with Ms. Pasher, and then we can go to the.
Yeah, I think, I can start, but I think my colleagues would be better to answer that specifically. I think, thanks for your comments. Our airports really do care, and a lot of work is underway. Would more data in terms of the issues that are being presented and how fast they're being remedied be helpful? Absolutely. I think data is always helpful in improving the system. And I did talk about continuous improvement is our goal. And we want to make sure that everyone can access our system and do so in the way they want to experience that process.
Ms. Pasher, is there a consistent system of reporting complaints related to accessibility across Canadian airports?
I'm going to let my turn it over to them, if you could.
I thought maybe you could give me the sort of the national view on that, whether there's a national, your response prompted me to ask this, but if there's a consistent national approach to reporting complaints.
Just through the CTA really would be, I'll leave my colleagues answer that one. Yeah. I don't know, Karush, if you want to weigh in.
They're trying to decide who goes first.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. Happy to take this one. We have a number of different ways that we solicit feedback from passengers. There's certainly a complaint area where passengers can write in with concerns that we have. But we also survey passengers on a proactive and ongoing basis to better understand how our services and programs are performing and where there's opportunity to correct. Depending on the feedback that we get, the response is directly tied to that. Infrastructure things take significantly longer. Process changes are easy to implement, and we work directly with various parties at the airport to make those changes.
Minoche, in regards to my last question around, is there a consistent system across Canadian airports? Are you aware of a consistent system for airport authorities to report that kind of data when it comes to accessibility complaints?
Unfortunately, I can only speak for Pearson. I'm not familiar with what other airports are doing in this space.
Perhaps, Ms. Vroomen, could you share YVR's approach on that topic?
Yeah, our approach is very similar to Toronto's in that we certainly have a complaints process, but frankly, most of the time when we get complaints about accessibility issues, we're generally CC'd on a complaint that's already going to one of our airlines. So we receive very, very few relating actually to our services. So we proactively go out and solicit feedback in the same way that Karush described. But to your specific question, there is no national system of reporting other than through the CTA.
Thanks for that. And I agree. It seems like most of the focus of these inquiries and the media coverage that we've heard has to do with the airline experience as opposed to airport authorities. I did want to thank your team, Ms. Vroomen, for giving me a tour of YVR on a recent visit to the airport. I'm there a lot, as are my other BC colleagues. And one of the things that was shared with me was the new program whereby you have ambassadors that greet passengers right at the curb, and then help them through the process to the handoff at the check-in kiosk. And one of the topics that came up at a previous meeting was, how people with disabilities or people who require accommodations, how they identify that to personnel at the airport. And our understanding is that they essentially have to self-identify in order to obtain accommodations, and part of that has to do with privacy protections. But I wonder if your ambassadors are able to offer some sort of generic prompt at the curb to everyone, regardless of whether they have a visible disability, in order to identify people who require certain accommodations. Is there a conversation that they engage passengers in around accommodating their experience?
Yeah, thank you for that, and thanks for the shout out to my staff. They're very pleased at any time to take people through our operations. That is a new program. It's similar to what you would see in a hotel setting where you're greeted at the curb, but it's very new for airports. And what we're finding is already, just in the 3 months that we've been launched this program, we have over 2,000 people with diverse needs that have been identified and served proactively. And these folks have special training to be able to identify, but also to ask in a private but human-centered way if people need assistance. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not. We have found significant improvement in expediting people in a personalized way through to check-in, which then allows us to forward on and coordinate with airlines through to the gate.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vrooman, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach, and thanks to all of our witnesses for appearing before us today and sharing their expertise on this very important study for all Canadians. Colleagues, I'm going to suspend for 2 minutes as we go in camera to discuss some committee business, and I'd like to ask the witnesses to log off at their pleasure. This meeting stands suspended.